To see you this morning, and it's great to come together and worship, isn't it? We do so in a community. When we do so, we're doing so as we worship. As we worship, we're recognizing who God is, and we've done that through singing, through our conversations, and through coming together and recognizing who God is. And we do that with relative freedom, don't we? We didn't have to, other than the weather stopping us, we didn't have anyone else telling us we couldn't come together today. Over the last few weeks, we've been looking at that series. I keep on wanting to sing Let It Go every time it comes up. But we've been looking at things that we hold on to that stop us from looking at Jesus. We've looked at fear. We've looked at the things that we don't know, and that can sometimes cause us to fear either missing out or fear and have anxiety. We've talked about sin and sometimes the shame that we hold on to for the things that we don't do. But we've also talked about restored relationship. We've talked about grace. We've talked about God's love coming in and walking alongside us as we've done so. I'd like us to look at a passage in Daniel this morning, Daniel 3. We're going to look at a situation where that faith, those barriers to faith, were external rather than internal, and actually what happened to these group of these three people. They're called Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah originally. But I always remember them from VeggieTales, I'm sorry. I call them Rack, Shack and Benny. That's what they were known as to me. But they are... Who are they? Yeah, thank you. Well done. Well done. So just to give you a bit of a context, and I'll explain why this links to some of the stuff that we've been looking at in the previous weeks shortly. Israel and its identity as being God's has been overtaken by Babylon. The cream of the crop, those that were seen as the leading lights, have been taken away, and Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego, Hananiah, Mishael and Azariah, and Daniel were part of that cream of the crop. They were taken in and suddenly confronted with a very different culture. A culture that wasn't God-centered. It was more about the empire. It was more about the other gods. It was more about control. And they did it in a very subtle way. We read in Daniel 1 and 2 how they went in and they were suddenly treated exceptionally well. They could have everything that they wanted effectively. And the word assimilation is all I can think of. Any Trekkie fans here, you think of assimilation, you think of the Borg, they come in and just whoom and take over people. But they did it in a much subtler way because they enticed people. But these four, and I have to say straight away, were they the only four that were the cream of the crop? Probably not. But these four recognised that even though they weren't in Jerusalem, even though their identity as a nation, because it had been broken up, was gone in one respect, that didn't mean that they couldn't be distinctively different. What happens in this case is they choose to live differently, and as they choose to live differently, they are suddenly elevated. Daniel, we know, interprets some dreams, and suddenly he's put in the royal court, and these three are now leaders and they're basically administrators over the province. And that's rattled a few people, particularly the astrologers who were at the top of the chain, who could basically decide and tell Nebuchadnezzar at the time whatever he wanted and whatever allowed them to have that control and power. And suddenly people who were being different, that weren't conforming, were in that position. Their faith had elevated them and made them stand out. But as we know, faith also has a habit of, when it makes you stand out, it also makes you a target, so to speak. So, we read in Daniel 3. If we start at verse 1. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned the satraps, the prefects, the governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "Nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound from the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into the blazing furnace." Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flutes, you can see what's going to go here, a bit repetition, zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the nations and peoples of every language fell down and worshipped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. May your majesty be issued. Your majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold, and that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into the blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you've set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, your majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up." So we have these three who recognize where their identity is now sticking out because of what they believe. These astrologers, like I said just now, didn't like the fact that they weren't following suit with everybody else. They weren't conforming. They weren't being tempted by all that Babylon could offer, and in turn weren't being controlled. Eager to see the rejection of their culture that surrounded them be exposed, i.e. that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego served Yahweh, they pointed out to Nebuchadnezzar all that they were doing. Why aren't they complying? Everybody else is. Who do they think they are? Don't they realise who Nebuchadnezzar is? It says in verse 13 that he was furious with rage. Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, so these men were brought before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true that you don't serve my gods or worship the image of gold that I've set up? Now when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, "King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it. And he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he doesn't, we want you to know, Your Majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. I don't know about you, but I know there's been times when I've had to stand up for my faith, defend it. And I'm just thankful for the position that I've had where I've never had to lay my life on the line to do so, as many people have. But I kept on getting pulled to this point here, that their faith was strong enough to know that their glory was elsewhere, that who they believed in was greater than this earthly place. Nebuchadnezzar was furious, it says in verse 19. And he tells the soldiers to make it extra hot. It's hot enough as it is. But make it so hot to the point that when they throw them in, the actual soldiers that throw them in get killed by the heat. We live in a culture, and we live in a country where it's easy for us to be who we are to an extent. But the challenge is we are also slowly being encouraged to live a different culture by the things around us. They're telling us that actually, rather than putting God where he needs to be, actually you can put yourself. And everything that you do can allow you to be the best version of yourself. You want to take a photo of yourself? Oh, you don't like the way you're looking? You can just use a bit of Photoshop and change it. The Google Pixel 8 advert at the moment with the best version. But that's what they're saying we need to be, isn't it? The best version of ourselves. Where we've already been talking about the fact that actually God wants us to recognise our true version of ourselves. Somebody told me this word, and I've grown to, I keep on saying it at the moment. It's the word flawsome. Okay? Who knows what it means? Flawed, but awesome. And the context they gave was that when we recognise that we're flawed, God changes us and allows us to become awesome in relationship with him. So I'd like you to turn to the person next to you and go, you're flipping flawsome. Flipping flawsome. Guys, a bit lots of flipping. But actually, I know we joke about that, but actually, I sometimes struggle with that. I struggle to see myself as particularly good at things. I struggle to recognise those times when actually God puts a lot more faith in me than I do in myself. And actually God chooses to use us to make a difference in the community, in the world that we're in. We're not his plan B to save the world. We're his plan A. But it's when we recognise that actually we get put into positions where sometimes we need to raise our head a bit higher and recognise that we're going to get fallout. If we think about the early church, we have quite a good example in Jesus himself, but also, you look at the disciples. 10 of them died for their faith. One of them was exiled for life, for what they stood for. And part of the reason I picked this up was because I think God is preparing us as a church to step out, to make space for him to move into. But as we do that being distinctively his. Not distinctively Life Community Church, distinctively God's. And what's going to come from that is great opportunity, but there's going to be challenge. We're going to experience challenge because what we're doing is different to what the world wants us to do. We have hope, don't we? But sometimes it's hard to see that in a world where everything seems to be going wrong. Things aren't being invested in. People aren't being seen. And people are being forgotten. And actually, we're at a point where the church, not just our church, but the global church is in a position where it has the opportunity to try and show people a different culture. As we read the rest of this passage, what do we see? We see as they're thrown in, Nebuchadnezzar jumps up. He leaps to his feet in verse 24. He's amazed. He's amazed as he does so. And he goes, weren't there 3 men we tied up and threw into the fire? And they went, certainly, Your Majesty. He said, look, I can see 4 men walking around in fire, unbound and unharmed. And the 4th looks like the son of the gods. He then approaches the blazing furnace and shouts and calls them to come out. And he's amazed. And as a result of that, he recognises the power of who the God of the Israelites was. But this is the start of still more challenge, because we know later on in the book of Daniel himself gets challenged and he's thrown into the lion's den. And we know that every time we think about how people have stepped out in faith, it's come with challenge, and it's challenge which refines us and allows us to depend more on Christ. When I was at university, I went to university. For me, it was a miracle that I got there, but I went to university trying to become a teacher, and I studied English and philosophy and religious studies. And the RE department was pro-Eastern religion, and every negative connotation to do with religion was always about Christianity. Always. And I had this decision to make. I got through, and most of my work was 2-1, my teaching practices, and my last one was a first. And I knew that if I did really well in my finals, I could probably get a 2-1. I didn't think I'd get it first, but I knew I could get a 2-1. And they give you some guidance of the sort of questions that it's going to be asked, and they'll say there'll always be one about this. But every single question when I got into that exam for the RE side of it wanted me to basically just put down Christianity. And I just went, and I looked at it and just went, I'm going to answer the question, but not how you want me to, because I felt like I had to respond back. And I got a 2-2. But it was one of those moments for me that I felt like I had to stand up for what I believed in. And I can talk to you about that one. I can't talk to you about some of the times when I haven't. And that's where fear and shame and all these things come in, because actually the world has 2 messages. You need to be perfect and you're not good enough. Doesn't it? Because you need to have this, you need to attain this. You'll be successful when you've got the nice house, you've got the perfect car and the perfect clothes and all these other things. But actually, what we know is that it's not about those perfect things. It's about relationship, and it's about who we are in relationship with and how we are in relationship. I recognise that we are in a place where we have we're having lots of opportunity to serve. I recognise that we're in a place where we need to look at how we do so and recognise that vulnerability is part of that. That we are flawsome, but we need to embrace that flawed element in order to recognise how God can make us awesome. I don't know about you, but I feel I feel really challenged at the moment. I feel like being a Christian could be really easy if I keep my head down, but actually I feel that there are times when we're put into situations that are really tough. Work is really hard because I'm having to make some really tough decisions, but I also recognise that God's put me there for a reason, and it's recognising that he's called us to make tough decisions, but do so in a way that reflects him. So I wonder if, when you read this passage, and if you think about just where we are and where we're going, where you see yourself in that, where you see how you can be part of God's message to this community, how you can see how actually God has brought you to this place with all that you are, to be able to use that to glorify him. We are here, and we get to be here to worship God, to worship him in everything that we do, through everything that we are. But it starts with us recognising that we are not perfect. We are people who struggle on a daily basis. There's a reason why we're called to take up our cross daily, because we experience challenges every single day. And the second we think we've got it sorted, the second we are reminded that actually we're trying to, by being that way, by recognising we think we've got it sorted, we're suddenly going, oh, I've got it sorted. I struggled when I was preparing for this talk, because I felt it was something that hit quite close to home for me. But actually, as I prayed about it, I felt that actually it's something that we need to recognise if we're going to grow to be a place that accepts people and embraces people for who they are, but allows God to speak into their lives and build relationship. I think it would be good for us to pray. I've not spoken for very long, but I think it would be good for us to pray about our relationship with God. We were singing just now about recognising who God is, and recognising about how we can give him the glory in all the things that we do. And I sense that there is part of us that sometimes doesn't think we're good enough to do that. But you don't need to be good enough, because God loves you for who you are. He accepts you for who you are. And through knowing him, he allows us to use all those different things to show people that they don't have to be perfect. They just need to know that God loves them, and God is able to grow us and allow us to know how we can serve in the future.
Can we just do